Welcome to Law Talk with BJ. I'm BJ Bernstein, enjoying a cup of ginger tea with you this afternoon as we talk through today COVID in the courts. I kind of want to update you. I know you may watch the news or read the paper, but there's just so much information coming at you. I just want to try to give you a simple overview of what's going on and how the virus is changing the legal system and how it's going to last a while, so that if you have legal needs or thoughts about a case that you have or you get arrested or something's going on where you've already filed a case, you have a concept of how they're being handled right now. The courts are open. They are not closed. They may be working at a dramatically slower rate, but the courts, that part of government, has just not closed. And that's an important thing to remember. And it's necessary because there's so many things that happen. For instance, number one, if you are arrested and you are incarcerated, there are certain rights. You need to go before a judge for a preliminary hearing to have your basic rights. You may need a bond hearing to try to get out. Those things still need to happen. Same thing with civil cases. There are a lot of civil matters that need to be answered right now. I mean, there's litigation going on literally about how the COVID crisis is being handled, what the power of the government is to do and not do certain things. And the federal courts have been open and having hearings on those issues. They have not closed. That said, they're not operating as they normally could. The most apparent thing is, we're not having jury trials, and it makes sense. Are you going to bring in hundreds of people to be in a room, to later go to another room to answer questions and sit on a jury in a box where there are 12 seats put together? That's definitely not social distancing. And whether you're going to even take somebody out of their regular life to do that during this crisis in which our kids are not in school, a lot of things are closed, or if you are working, you're working in an industry where you're desperately needed, in medicine, if you're working with groceries, all the essential workers, the postal service, everybody who does something to help you eat, help you survive, help keeps you healthy, they are all working overtime and then some. And so to all of a sudden say, okay, we're pulling you out of that and sending you to the courthouse, that is disruptive and difficult. It's always disruptive, but right now, we're in a unique time with regard to that. So how are we doing this and what's happening? Well, part of it is just the leadership and the forethought of each state and a lot of judges in each state who planned for this. I live in Georgia and practice law in Georgia, and we're fortunate that the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court, Justice Melton, had already worked with guidelines for the courts and contemplated, I don't know if this exact emergency, but did contemplate rules for when an emergency comes into play and how can the court stay open and function during a crisis. And so that's what we're operating on now, where certain functions still continue when you were arrested, certain hearings are still happening, but at the same time, deadlines, like, you're not being able to meet with your clients normally, and if you're trying to file a motion or file suit, certain deadlines are being extended because everybody's life is upended, or different ways of having hearings even than we've contemplated before. Part of it using the very social media like I'm speaking to you on. These are all the things that are going to try to keep the justice wheels spinning, so to speak. Not perfect, but we're working towards making it better. I think the best example of proof that it was going on is from the U.S. Supreme Court still having their oral arguments as they normally do in the cases that were to be before them, although just not at the U.S. Supreme Court, but rather they were all participating from their own home. The litigants were at their home or office, and it was done online. That was a very important thing to happen because the U.S. Supreme Court was signaling courts still function. We are still here to do the business of the courts, which are an integral part of our constitutional democracy. And so by that court having court in that way, it helps lead the way for other courts to feel like it. I know in Georgia, the Georgia Supreme Court, Georgia Court of Appeals, they have been having arguments virtually. And those, are easier to do because there are experienced lawyers in court arguing a case on appeal. The tricky part, though, is a jury trial, needing a jury trial. It's one thing, it's arguments with the judges and lawyers, but bringing in the public for a jury, we're not ready for that yet. And that has not happened yet. And there's great concern because it could be a year or more before we're waiting to be able to have a jury trial, and yet people are waiting in jail for a jury trial. Your life is literally on hold in jail, not having been convicted of a crime, waiting in line just for that to start. And then when they start, there's going to be a backlog. How are we going to clear that? I don't have an answer, but these are things that the lawyers and judges are talking about that the public needs to know as well. Because when you are trying to figure out, when you call a lawyer, what kind of response you're going to get, what your expectations are, because when you have a legal problem, it feels immediate. I want help now. And courts were already slow, and to hear that they're even slower is not news you necessarily want to get. But it's a reality that you need to deal with. But it is important to know it has not stopped completely. I just read an article today that in the federal courts, they're still having hearings, but they're only at about a 25% level. So that tells you 75% of the cases are being slowed down or running behind, can't get into court. And then when we can get into court, what is that going to look like? Because a jury trial by video, I can't imagine it. I won't say anything yet. I'm not going to prejudge it, but I am concerned because I know what happens in a jury trial. You know how you have to see people and hear people to assess them and judge them and look at them yourself. What if the camera's not on the witnesses a certain way? What if the lawyer is a good lawyer but terrible online and is, we're not talking to cameras, we're talking to people. And so they may be looking at the camera in the wrong way if that's how we're trying to do it for a jury trial. It's just all things to take into account that I don't have an answer for. But I'm just mentioning to you so that when you hear the discussion of putting things back together, or if it's going to take a long time for health to fully return, as obviously they're talking about it, this coming again in the fall, and that we won't be clear for a lengthy period of time. How are we going to do this and have justice and fairness? Because can you imagine being incarcerated and you would have normally been let go had you could have gone to court, but you just had to wait for court for too long to be able to keep your freedom? That's a very scary thing. So I just ask that you pay attention maybe not as closely as I am, but pay attention, because you never know when you're going to need a voice in court. You can still bring things up to lawyers. You can still reach out to them, and I encourage you to, if you have any issues, whether it's, dealing with family law, contract law, you've been in an accident, all those things, you can still talk to a lawyer and connect to a lawyer, but it's just not, you're getting to court is going to be a while away. I'll try to keep you updated on the podcast here. Thank you for joining me. Be safe. Thanks.